from the Hotel Eden, what we wanted to do. What we wanted to do was spill boiling oil onto the heads of our enemies as they attempted to bang down the gates of our village, but as everyone now knows, we had some problems, primarily technical problems, that prevented us from doing what we wanted to do the way we had hoped to do it. What we're asking for today is another chance. There has been so much media attention to this whole boiling oil issue that it is time to clear the air. There's a great deal of pressure to dismantle the system we have in place and bring the oil down off the roof. Even though there isn't much left, this would be a mistake. Yes, there were problems last month during the Visigoth raid, but as I will note, these are easily remedied. From its inception, I have been intimately involved in the boiling oil project. Research, development, physical deployment. I also happened to be team leader on the roof last month when we had the occasion to try the system during the Visigoth attack, about which so much has been written. It was not an entirely successful sortie, as I will show. The Visigoths, about 24, did penetrate the city and rape and plunder for several hours, but there was no pillaging. And make no questions about it, they now know we have oil on the roof, and several of them are going to think twice before battering down our door again. I'm not saying it may not happen, but when it does, they know we'll be ready. First, the very concept of oil on the roof upsets so many of our villagers. Granted, it is exotic, but all great ideas seem strange at first. When our researchers realized we could position a cauldron 200 feet directly above our main portals, they began to see the possibilities of the greatest strategic defense system in the history of mankind. The cauldron was expensive. We all knew a good defense was going to be costly. The cauldron was manufactured locally after procuring copper and brass from our mines, and it took, as is common knowledge, 2 years to complete. It is a beautiful thing capable of holding 110 gallons of oil. What we could not foresee was the expense and delay of building an armature. Well, of course, it's not enough to have a big pot, pretty as it may be. How are you going to pour its hot contents on your enemies? The construction of an adequate superstructure for the apparatus required dear time. Another year during which the Huns and Exogoths were raiding our village almost weekly. Let me ask you to remember that era. Was it any fun? I want to emphasize that we were committed to this program, and we remain committed. But at every turn, we met problems that our researchers could not, regardless of their intelligence and intuition, have foreseen. For instance, how were we to get a 1,900-pound brass cauldron onto the roof? When had such a question been asked before? And at each of these impossible challenges, our boiling oil teams have come up with a solution. The cauldron was raised to the roof by means of a custom-designed net and hoist, including a rope 4 inches in diameter, which was woven on the spot under less than ideal conditions, as the Retrogoths and Niligoths plundered our village almost incessantly during the cauldron's 4-month ascent. To our great and everlasting credit, we did not drop the pot. The superstructure for pouring the device was dropped once, but it was easily repaired on site 200 feet above the village steps. That was quite a moment, and I remember it well. Standing on the roof by that gleaming symbol of our impending safety, a bright brass and few lesser metals beacon to the world that we were not going to take it anymore. The wind carried up to us the cries of villagers being carried away by either the Maxigoths or the Minigoths, and it was hard to tell. But there we stood, and as I felt the wind in my hair and watched the sporadic procession of home furnishings being carried out of our violated gates, I knew we were perched on the edge of a new epoch. Well, there was some excitement. We began at once. We started a fire under the cauldron and knew we would all soon be safe. And at that point, I made a mistake, which I now readily admit. In the utter ebullience of the moment, I called down. I did not scream maniacally, as reported. I called down that it would not be long, and I probably shouldn't have, because it may have led to some of our citizenry to lower their guard. It was a mistake, I admit it. There were, as we found out almost immediately, still some bugs to be worked out of the program. For instance, there had never been a fire on top of an entry tower before, and yes, as everyone is aware, we had to spend more time than we readily wanted containing the blaze, fueled as it was by the fresh, high winds and the tower's wooden shingles. But I hasten to add that the damage was moderate as a 4-hour fire could be. And the billowing black smoke surely gave further intruders lurking in the hills pause as they considered finding any spoils in our ashes. But throughout this relentless series of setbacks, pitfalls, and rooftop fires, there has been a hardcore of us absolutely dedicated to doing what we wanted to do, and that was to splash scalding oil onto intruders as they pried or battered yet again at our old damaged gates. To us, a little fire on the rooftop was no consequence, a fribble, a tiny obstacle to be stepped over with an easy stride. Were we tired? Were we dirty? Were some of us burned and cranky? No matter, we were committed. And so the next day, on the first quiet day we had had in this village in months, that same sooty cater stood in the warm ashes, high above the entry steps, and tried again. We knew, as we know right now, that our enemies are manifold and voracious and generally rude and persistent, and we wanted to be ready. But tell me this, where does one find out how soon before an enemy attack to put the oil on to boil? Does anyone know? Let me assure you, it is not in any book. We were writing the book. We were vigilant. We squinted at the horizon all day long, and when we first saw dust in the foothills, we refired our cauldron, using wood which had been elevated through the night in woven baskets. Even speaking about it here today, I can feel the excitement stirring in my heart. The orange flames licked at the sides of the brass container hungrily as if in concert with our own desperate desire for security and revenge. In the distance, I could see the phalanx of Visigoths marching toward us like a warship through a sea of dust, and in my soul I pitied them and the end towards which they so steadfastly hastened. They seemed the very incarnation of mistake, their dreams of a day abusing our friends and families, and of petty larceny and lewd public behavior about to be extinguished in one gorgeous wash of searing oil. I was beside myself. It is important to know now that everyone on the roof that day exhibited orderly and methodical behavior. There was professional conduct of the first magnitude. There was no wild screaming or cursing or even the kind of sarcastic chuckling which you might expect in those about to enjoy a well-deserved and long-delayed victory. The problems of the day were not attributable to inappropriate deportment. My staff was good. And when the Visigoths had approached close enough that we could see their cruel eyes and we could read the savage, misspelled tattoos, I realized our error. At that time, I put my hand on the smooth side of our beautiful cauldron and found it only vaguely warm, lukewarm, tepid. We had not known then what we know now. We need to put the oil on sooner. It was my decision and my decision alone to do what we did, and that was to pour the warm oil onto our enemies as they milled about the front gates, hammering at it with their truncheons. Now, this is where my report diverges from so many of popular accounts. We have heard it said that warm oil served as a stimulant to the attack that followed, the attack I alluded to earlier, in which the criminal activity seemed even more animated than usual in the minds of some of our townspeople. Let me say first, I was an eyewitness. I gave the order to pour the oil, and I witnessed its descent. I am happy and proud to report that the oil hit its targets with an accuracy and completeness I could only have dreamed of. We got them all. There was oil everywhere. We soaked them. We coated them. We covered them with a lustrous layer of oil. Unfortunately, as everyone knows, it was only warm. Their immediate reaction was also what I had hoped for: surprise and panic. This, however, lasted about 1 second. Then several of them looked up into my face and began waving their fists in what I could only take as a tribute. And then, yes, they did become quite agitated anew, recommencing their assault on the weary planks of our patchwork gates. Some have said that they were on the verge of abandoning their attack before the oil was cast upon them, which I assure you is not true. As to the attack that followed, it was no different in magnitude or intensity from any of the dozens we suffer every year. It may have seemed more odd or extreme since the perpetrators were greasy and thereby more offensive, and they did take every stick of furniture left in the village, including the pews from the church, every chair in the great hall, and 4 milking stools, the last 4 from the dairy. But I, for one, am simply tired of hearing about the slippery stain on the village steps. Yes, there's a bit of a mess, and yes, some of it seems to be permanent, but my team removed what they could with salt and talc all this week. All I'll say now is watch your step as you come and go, and in my mind it's a small inconvenience to pay for a perfect weapon system. So we've had our trial run, we gathered lots of data, and you all know we'll be ready next time. We are going to get to do what we wanted to do. We will vex and repel our enemies with boiling oil. In the meantime, who needs furniture? We have a project. We need the determination not to lose the dream, and we need a lot of firewood. They will come again. You know it, and I know it, and let's simply commit ourselves to making sure that the oil, when it falls, is very hot.